How is everybody doing? Thanks for being patient. I was going to go early and I was going to explain some of Bill Bengston's story on my own. And I decided, you know what? Let's have Bill do that. So that's why I didn't go earlier. I mean, Bill was scheduled for now. So you didn't miss anything. And I am going to bring him in a few minutes. I found out about his work a few years ago. 4 or 5 years ago, I was working in Houston, and somebody I worked with came up to me and said, "Hey, you know about Bill Bengston? He does healing of mice and manifesting." I'm like, "No, I was arrogant. I'm like, if this guy is somebody I need to know, I would have known about it." She's like, "Check this out." So I check it out. This was Grace in Houston. Hopefully she's watching. And I checked it out. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's exactly what I've been looking for. This is the skeptic I have always wanted, and that's Bill Bengston. And I'm going to bring Bill in. I'm going to give it one more minute. And I read both of his books or on audio, which I have in the links. You guys need to read. Excellent. It's some of the most important research. And I've said it before, more important than UFOs because there's data. And there's data for UFOs, obviously. But most of the data, alleged data, is hidden in government classified programs, and most of the data is anecdotal. With Bill Bengston, it's not anecdotal. There is actual laboratory data experiments. And I'm going to bring Bill in right now, and hopefully you guys will share this interview as far and wide as possible. And I'm going to bring Bill in. Let me just get rid of one thing. Bill, thank you so much for being here. I've been waiting to interview you for a long time.
Pleasure.
I'm going to start out. And just tell me your background, your education.
I have a PhD with an emphasis on research methods and statistics. I'm fundamentally a researcher, though I spent quite a number of years being a professor. That's the short version.
And did you have any interest in any of this growing up? Like, what kind of child were you growing up? And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Douglaston, Queens, which is on the border of Nassau and Queens. It's really, really close. I could throw a rock and hit Nassau. Did I have an interest? I mean, casual, but nothing crazy. I was familiar with some of the popular literature. I'd read primarily, as you mentioned, anecdotes. You hear people telling stories, and here's their story and all that. But I didn't have any professional background. In the early 1970s, I actually took a course in parapsychology just out of curiosity to see what was going on. And I was introduced to some of the professional literature, and it was an eye-opener, because people talk about stuff back and forth. And I was one of those but I didn't know really the kind of empirical work that had been done already. And so I was introduced, for example, in that course, it was offered by a guy by the name of Douglas Dean. I was introduced to the incredible healing work of Bernard Grad, who I think is the granddaddy of all healing research. And when I came across Grad stuff, it really opened my eyes. Because here was a guy at McGill University in the medical school and Department of Oncology who did conventional kinds of biological studies on healing. And as far as I know, he was the first one really to nail it down and make it methodologically pure. So growing up, I had curiosity about this and that because I'm a curious person, but nothing serious until probably the early 1970s.
Yeah, and I had never heard of Grad until I saw you speak about him. And for folks who don't know, there is an article on Bill's website about the great Grad. And I always thought, and I was part of metaphysical churches where we did healing and things like that. And to be honest with you, I thought it was nonsense. I never saw any experiments. I dabbled in reading about it. I'm like, you know what? There's no evidence for this. And then I stumbled upon your work. I'm like, there is evidence for this. So tell me about 1970s. I don't know if you remember the year when you first met Ben Mayrick, and what were you doing at that time?
I was doing what normally you do. I was a lifeguard. I went from lifeguard to being a professor so I could avoid working. So I've never actually had a job. I just kind of flipped from this to that. And I had met him while I was lifeguarding at a pool in Great Neck. And this was probably 1971. I'm going to make that up. It was either 71 or 72, probably 71. And he was a member of the pool. And I had heard that there was this psychic. I had never met a psychic. There was a psychic who was a member of the pool, and I said, I'd like to meet this psychic guy. And so that's how I was introduced to him. I asked him about his psychic stuff. He was probably in his late 40s at the time, and he had told me that he had just discovered 8 months previously that he was psychic. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And he said, I can do reading. I can, what we would call psychometry. And I said, okay, let me give you take you out for a ride, see what happens. So I handed him my wallet and I said, hold the wallet and see what you get. And he started to tell some stuff. And I just said, this is crazy stuff. This is crazy stuff. The stuff he was talking about was real. And so it kind of instigated my rabid curiosity to see if I could skeptically make this guy go away. So here is a guy who can do readings, and you give him psychometric things and he holds them and he gets impressions. Let's see if we can do it under systematic conditions. And the simple reality is I couldn't beat him.
And when you say skeptical, I mean, had you ever experienced anything like that before that?
I mean, I had hunches, and this and intuition, but I don't think out of the ordinary. And this guy couldn't heal at the time, or he didn't know he could heal. So he had just discovered that he was psychic, and he was wandering around scratching his head going, could this be real? So the stuff was happening to him. And I said, well, let me see if I can take you out for a spin and see if we can make this thing go away. And I started to design at a very early age double-blind studies, whereas he was doing medical diagnoses of people in the hospital that he had never met. And I could compare it to the actual medical records. Probably be against the law now. But at the time, it's probably against the law then, too. But at the time, we weren't caught. And I'm sure the statute of limitations is over. The short version is, in opaque envelopes was somebody's patient's signature. We didn't know who it was. And I would hand the big opaque envelopes. I wouldn't know what it was. I'd give it to him and I'd say, why are they in the hospital? And the question was, could he get the diagnosis right? And we did 8 of these. He got 8 out of 8. I was all excited at one point because I thought he had missed one, so I could go and call him a loser. But it turns out it was a misdiagnosis on the part of the hospital. He was right. The person was in the hospital, got discharged, came back with his diagnosis. And I said, something interesting is going on here. And I couldn't make the effect go away.
In all the work you've done over the years, is he the most impressive, intuitive psychic you've ever worked with or come across?
I would say, I mean, since he was in his late 40s at the time, and he had only done it 8 months earlier, I don't know what the rest of his life was really like. Again, you start collecting anecdotes, and sometimes you're not sure what to do with it, or sometimes it reinforces your belief and all that. I'm not a major follower of anecdote. I like to do things that are, like, here's a protocol, here's the study, here's how we do it, and so I'm kind of rigid and lab focused, and was even back then. He's got to be up there. I don't have a psychic meter.
Right.
This guy was seriously impressive. And I'm a card-carrying skeptic, but I couldn't beat this guy.
And so your back is hurting, you're swimming. Talk about your swimming and how it affected your back, affected your swimming, and how Benjamin Mayrick, right? That's his name?
Bennett, yep.
Bennett Mayrick, sorry.
Mayrick. Yeah, I had a bad back for years. I was a competitive swimmer, had a college scholarship, and all of this. And I was in pain most of the time. I had a bad back. A lot of people have lower back pain, but I was a butterflyer, and it's not good for a butterfly to have a bad back or a weak back. After about 100 meters, it just wasn't working anymore. And so I spent a good chunk of my time trying to be in a position that I wasn't in pain. You know, I mean, you've seen people in pain and they're trying to make it go away. I was the first healing this guy ever did. We were sitting in someone's kitchen, and I was telling him about, he was telling me about readings that he had recently done as an anecdote. And he was describing what happened in some of his readings. If he did a reading on someone and they were in physical pain or they had some sickness, reported to him, and then eventually reported to us, when he was doing the reading, they didn't have to be present, but they would have some health benefit from it. And so people who were in pain started to have pain reduced and all of that. He wasn't trying to do that. He was just doing readings. But in the readings, there were physical effects. And so I, who was in pain at the time and spent most of the day in pain, said, you know, what an idiot, asked this guy for a healing. So I said, you know, schmuck, do this, fix my back. And he said, how? And I said, I don't know, put your hands on my back. So I went and I leaned over a kitchen table and I put it down and he said, what do I do now? I said, put your hands on my back. He put his hands on my back and it felt like first heat, then Novocaine, and then like Novocaine wearing off from the perimeter, it eventually wore off over a course of, I'm making this up, 15 minutes. And the Novocaine feeling for my last back pain. And so I'm left with, this is interesting. So, I mean, you got two ways to go if something like this happens to you. The most common, I think, and maybe the most appropriate, I'm not sure, but the most common response will be walk away, you know, keep it to yourself, zip it, move away. And it was probably just, you know, suggestion anyway, you know, and the pain will eventually come back. Or two, you dive in and you try to figure out what in heaven's name just happened to you. And for better, for worse, I went down the second road. You know, what in heaven's name happened?
Did you go to people and, you know, friends and family and say, you're not going to believe what happened?
Oh, heavens, yes. Yeah. And they didn't. And I didn't blame them. And then I started to drag people in there who had physical problems. And we found out very early, and it basically me obsessing about how do I study this? How do I do this? You know, and so we started out on people, and we found, you know, there were patterns. There were some things he was particularly good at. There were some things he wasn't so good at. He was good at malignancies. He wasn't good at benign growths, just as an example. And that incidentally continues to this day. So it's not magic. It's not miraculous. It's nothing like that. It is amenable to scientific inquiry. It's just that it's kind of a new field in terms of systematic data, and you know, people still make up a lot of stuff.
How did you figure out what he was doing? I don't know if I've ever heard you speak about specifically. You sit down with Ben and you say, okay, Ben, let's figure out exactly what you're doing. So maybe we can teach it to me and we could teach it to other people. So how did that work?
Well, this is going to truncate. I hung out with him for a couple of years, and we did a lot of stuff together. And my main job was to ask a lot of questions. I'm an annoying questioner, and his job was to go with his intuitive gut and figure out. Not figure out, but just kind of blurt out the answer. And so my task was to ask the right series of questions to get the right answers. You had to be really specific and really concrete in terms of the kinds of things you asked. And then you get a very explicit answer. But he didn't know, and he was kind of like a intuitive who responded to the questions. And I was basically the main questioner. And the thrust of it was, how unique is he, and could anybody do what he's doing? You know, I mean, that's from whence it stemmed. And his answer, sometimes he didn't like his own answers, but his answer was, yeah, anybody could do this. And then, you know, the follow-up question is, well, what do you have to do, and what's involved, and what would, like a novice come in from the outside, what would they have to do? And so the dialogue that I had with him over the course of many, many months is, I can't give you all the details, but it came up with the system that we have now that that I teach in workshops and I use in experiments. So it becomes this cycling technique, which is very rapid imaging, and so this has the plot came out of the dialogue I had with Ben. I would say we were co-creators of it.
Co-creators, and then I was gonna ask you something and I forgot about Ben teaching you. When did you decide to take this into the lab, and he's going to be your healer? And just talk about what happened and how he came through it flying colors, and you just watched him heal all these mice, and how that didn't really happen.
Didn't really happen. I watched a few hundred healings of humans, and
that's what I was going to say. Sorry. Oh, Bengston's talking about healing humans. There's no evidence for this. These are anecdotal stories. So that's the skeptical side. So how do you respond to that?
Oh, I would say be skeptical. You should always be skeptical. I mean, the stuff I'm talking about is crazy. This doesn't make any sense, and I don't pretend to understand it. I can use it. I can't make it stop. So I'm in a weird spot where I am a card-carrying skeptic. I remain a skeptic to this day, but the stuff just continues. So whatever it is, a skeptic isn't someone who's a disbeliever. That's a believer. A skeptic is someone who's open, who doesn't pretend to know all the answers. Believers pretend to know all the answers. And there are people who believe everything is true, and there's people who believe everything is false. They're both believers. I'm really in the middle, and I am a skeptic, and I'd recommend that as a good approach to things which are outlandish. And what I'm saying is outlandish. It really is. If you were saying it, I'd sit there and go, come on. I wouldn't default to believing you, but I watched, for my own edification, a few hundred healings, and then I took part in a few hundred healings, and then I realized that no matter how many hundreds of healings you have, it's not the same as having something that is systematic and controlled. And so I got frustrated. I got frustrated by a lot of things, but among the things I got frustrated by was people's reaction to this stuff. So even the people who were healed, the most bizarre responses. I mean, they would start to deny that they were healed. They would forget that they were ever sick. I mean, people are screwy. And the biggest problem I had in my simple brain is that I can't unravel what happens in a clinical test. Meaning, person comes in, and I'm oversimplifying, person comes in, you do, whatever your healing shtick is, and the person leaves and they're better, or the healing starts, or, something along those lines. But healing happens. What did it? Healing happens without healers. So what might be the conditions that bring about healing? Well, could just be time. It could be something they ate. It could be something they didn't eat. It could be, you can think of it. So you come in, some of it's stupid. I understand that. In my case, I was in pain for years, and this guy comes along, puts his hands on my back, and I'm not in pain anymore. That's a little too coincidental. I'm not going to say that's because of the English muffin I had in the morning.
Right. You can always say it's like, well, that's just a coincidence. I think you've spoken about, you've even had cases of gangrene, which do not.
Yeah, we had a gangrene case of a woman going to have her foot taken off, and the gangrene went away. That's hard to, but even then, we couldn't get people in authority, physicians and such, to be interested in following that up. So the gangrene doc said, flop on the floor, what in heaven's name is going on here? You don't have gangrene anymore. When asked, would you like to understand or see what happened to this? The answer was, at least honest, the answer was no. And why not? Because it doesn't, what do you do with that? What's the upside if you're a physician to saying gangrene spontaneously remitted? That's not going to sell. You're not going to do anything for your professional standing. You're not going to do anything for any standing. And what was the mechanism of action, so to speak? And the answer is, I don't know. And so until you dive deeper into that kind of stuff, the person on the outside usually doesn't have a professional upside to getting involved in this.
And, you know, it's, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I want to talk about, and I know a lot of doctors who don't want anything to do with this because, like you said, it's a career buster. There are people who are involved in alternative healing, and I've run this by some of them, and even they are skeptical about this. I can't get interest from folks in the UFO world, even folks in the alternative healing world. They struggle to hear this, to accept it, because as you said, it's crazy, it's ridiculous, and we haven't even gotten to the best stuff, which will come later when Dean joins us. But so fast forward, you and Ben.
But here's in answer to your, you know, why'd you get it? Why'd you go into the lab? It's I've watched a couple hundred get healed. I watched, and you know, I'm oversimplifying it. It's not miraculous. It's not magical. It's not instantaneous. Sometimes it was, but what happened to me in my back was rare in the sense that it fixed right away. Most healing begins a process. It's not, you know, the sky opens and a lightning bolt hits you. Healing accelerates, or healing begins where it otherwise would not have begun. You know, something along, there's patterns that go on, but I couldn't unravel them clinically because I can't control the environment. So you come in and you have a growth, you have a pain, you have a whatever you got, and someone comes along and does hocus pocus, and then you get fixed over some length of time. Usually, you get fixed. What did it? You know, again, was it time? Was it diet? Was it changed diet? Was it? You know, and all of that. And the answer is you don't know. And that's why, you know, frankly, medicine is an art. It's not a science, it's an art. There's a whole lot of guesswork, and clinical stuff is really, I call it soft. And I was growing tired of the softness of it all because I am a skeptic. And so I met a guy who became a good friend at Ben's, named Dave Crinsley, pretty well-known geologist. And we were both sitting there going, what do we do with these stories? You know, they're cute, they're fun, but that's not going to lend itself to anything. And we both decided basically on the spot, we need to go to the lab. And we need to do this stuff under seriously controlled conditions and see what happens, because we're missing something and we're not going to unravel it no matter how many hundreds of people get better. If you're looking to understand the stuff, you're not going to get there clinically. You're going to have clinical experience, you'll have clinical anecdote, but you're not going to have anything that would stand up to experimental scrutiny. And I wanted something that was without a viable counter hypothesis.
I believe I looked up Dave Crinsley passed in 2018 at 90.
Yeah.
So I know he was instrumental in your early.
Dave was one of the biggest influences in my life.
How was
in a whole lot of different ways. He was just he was the guy, you know, that really changed the trajectory of where I was going and what I was doing and all of that. So we went from, you know, soft kind of stuff to harder kind of stuff. He's the one who made me go out, not made me, but encouraged me to go out and get a PhD, so people would take me a little more seriously than if I'm just coming in off the street. He's the one who paid for the initial lab. He's the one, you know, without him, this wouldn't have happened.
So take me to the experiment set up Queens College, or was it City University of New York? I know. So Ben is the healer.
Queens is a campus of City University.
Okay. So Ben is the healer. Everything's ready to go. Everything's set.
Well, the question, and I can show you stuff. You asked me to bring a couple slides. I'd be happy to show you,
yes,
you know, exactly what happened. But the short version was, we've got this soft anecdote of person after person after person coming in to be, you know, get treated and healed and all that stuff. And it's cute, and we got a good long list of, you know, stories. We could tell a bunch of stories for a lot of time. But the question was, how do you come up with something that doesn't have really a viable counter hypothesis, that no matter how skeptical you are, the data will rule? You know, I mean, that's really the question. So once again, it was Dave Prinsley, who was a pretty well-known guy, in scientific circles. He got somebody, the head of the biology department at City University, and said, I want to do a test that has no counter hypothesis. That you can't say, oh well, it's cute, but what do you got? And he said, first of all, this is crazy. Anybody who thinks that you can heal, is nuts. So we had a non-believing head of the biology department. We had skeptics all over the place, and the biology department said, yeah, we'll do it because you're Dave Prinsley, and pretty well-known guy. And what he did, the head of the bio department said, I've got someone in my department who's been working on a mammary cancer for 20 years. The mammary cancer will kill the mouse. If you can fix a mouse, any mouse, if you can fix a mouse or make it live to a certain length of time, there's no viable counter hypothesis. We have literally thousands of experiments on this mouse.
Did they do any experiments even up till now where they used chemo or drugs or radiation which allow those mice to live beyond 27 days? I know that's the maximum lifespan when they have memory.
Well, what you're dealing with here, it depends on the model of mouse that you're willing. So, I mean, if you're doing cancer research in a lab, you got a catalog of mouse and type of cancer and all this stuff. So all mice don't have the same length of time they can live. It depends on who which kind of mouse you're dealing with. Some are faster, some are slower, and all of that. So in terms of have anyone been able to extend the not that I'm aware.
So this particular type of mouse in this particular experiment with mammary cancer, the maximum amount of time they would live would be 27 days after injection.
Yeah, but they're not going to live a month, so they're all dead in a month. And if we could make them live a month, we'd have the longevity record, and then you'd say you can't have a viable counter hypothesis to that. And if you have. So I mean, I didn't know anything about this stuff. I just, okay, if we have something that's known, and let's interject a single variable, which is this unorthodox healing. So we interject a single variable, see what happens. Will they live longer? Will they live better? Will they live, will anything happen? I mean, we didn't know. But the point of this is it's very different from me telling a story, once upon a time I had a bad back and now I don't, versus here we are under controlled conditions in a lab. There's no question what's going to happen. We got 20 years of experience. We have literally thousands of publications, and I come in like a lunatic and introduce a single variable. That's controlled conditions.
And if you want to get to your slides now, we can. I know. So Ben was supposed to be your healer, and then
Ben was supposed to be the healer, but we had delay after delay after delay. The mice were coming, the mice weren't coming, the mice were delayed. This happened, blah blah blah. And when the mice finally arrived, over time, Ben, who was supposed to be the healer, said, "I'm not doing it." And it would be a gross understatement to say that I had a fit. I had a Fit's greatest hit, because this was not simple to set up. This took a little bit of time, effort, money, resources, and a whole lot of other things. And when Ben backed out, I wasn't amused. And it was Prinsley who said, "Okay, so we don't have Ben. We have you." And I said, "I'm not a healer." And he said, "Yeah, I know, but you've been hanging around him a long time. Just go do your shtick." And so I did the shtick, and we found interesting things. And then that I can show you.
Yes, if you want to get to the slides, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll see if I can do this.
And I will continue to talk about Ben. I know if you can pull up your slides and talk. When did Ben pass away?
Now you're asking me trick questions.
It's all right. I'm just trying to. And like I said earlier, I had not heard of your research, and I still am struggling to get people interested. And just so people realize, and you can keep working on your slides. There you go.
Do I have it?
You do, and I'm going to pull it up, and you can continue. Ben backed out, and here we go.
Ben backed out, and so Prinsley said, "You do it. You be the healer." I said, it's not supposed to be about me, but I tried it anyway. I tried it skeptically, and I'll show you what happened. And this was to our utter amazement. So I got to skip around here a little bit now.
That's
so
fine.
I can get to. Okay, so here's an example of a mouse. And you got that, and it's ugly looking.
I got it. Perfect.
Okay, so you can see my pointer.
Let me see. Move your pointer. I can't see your pointer, but
okay. So let me just describe. You got a big wonking lump on the back left. Well, something just switched. Try again.
There you go.
We got a big wonking lump. This mouse, you don't have to be a biologist, nor do you need to see my pointer. This mouse is about to die. It's got a big, in the hindquarters, tumor, which has actually swallowed a leg. The fur is falling out. If you could see the eyes, there's nobody home. This is essentially a dead mouse. And this is what's supposed to happen in this particular form of cancer. It's a non-metastatic cancer. I think I can get to a different slide. It's a non-metastatic cancer, and the mouse is going to be, well, let's call it a month. The mouse is not going to last a month. Having said that, this says day 28, and that's 28 days after injection. And so what happens is these mice die an ugly death. It's not pretty. And we come along and we try this. This is now a picture of me doing this at Brown University in Providence. This is before COVID too. I'm not dressed up for COVID. I'm dressed up because we have a clean lab. So we are under seriously tight conditions here. This is what's supposed to happen. We introduce a single variable of healing, and then we watch to see what's going to happen. Now, this goes back to interesting things happen when we do this. I have pictures of students and faculty and all that acting as healers at this point, but I don't like to out other people. So we take mice which are about to die or mice which have been injected with a lethal cancer. We pass our hands around, or we do it from a distance, or we do whatever we're supposed to be doing. And interesting things happen. This is a different mouse. You can't see my pointer, but a little slit is starting to appear. And this little slit, which is starting to appear, opens up into a kind of an ugly looking ulceration. But if you look at this mouse, as opposed to this mouse, you can see this mouse is going to die. This mouse has good looking fur, and it's got a big wonkin ulceration, but the eyes are clear, the coat is clean, everything about it is okay, except it's seriously ugly and deformed. Now, when this happened, and this happened for the first time, I thought it was failing. Because I was thinking, if we do this, and it's going to work, and we get to the mice early enough, and we put our hands around the cage, or we do something along those lines, and we zap them somehow, that this would prevent the cancer from ever growing. But in all cases, and I mean all cases, the cancer grows anyway. And what happens is, it's not mind over matter. What happens is the tumor grows, the tumor gets bigger and bigger, it ulcerates, and then it implodes, and then the mouse is cured. And it's not remitted, it's not better, it's cured. And it's cured for the rest of its life. And it's beyond cured for the rest of its life. If we inject this mouse with cancer after it's been cured, it can't get cancer again. So it's reasonably interesting.
That's extremely interesting. And I know you've talked before, you wanted to end the experiment because you thought the mice.
It wasn't working. You know, I mean, give me a break. If you see something like this, and you're a normal person, you're going to say, well, that's not good. And it was Crinsley who said, keep going. It was Crinsley who said, one more day. It was Crinsley, and then suddenly it imploded and we had a cure.
And I know people are asking this, and I don't know if you've ever asked, how do you feel about mice being involved? Mice are dying. So how do you feel about that? Because I don't think I've ever heard you asked about that.
Well, it's ugly work. I don't like it. I just finished 2 experiments on mice in Tokyo. which we may or may not get to. But so I've done this stuff all over the place, and it's ugly. I'm still in the market for looking for a different biological model that we can play with. So we've played with zebrafish, we've played with worms, we played, so we played trying to do other stuff. But this is ugly work, and it's actually hard to do, and it's also expensive to do.
That's something I've never heard you speak about. The other day we mentioned that people are like, why aren't more people doing this? Why is it always Bill Bengston's name on the experiment? Why aren't other people replicating it? And you told me how much these experiments cost.
Well, the experiment I just did in Tokyo was about $150,000. I've done 20 of these. Do the math. And the preparation for some of the stuff has driven a single experiment up to $500,000. So
Where's
the
that money?
preparation for the healing stuff and this, and so I'm fortunate enough to have been reasonably well funded. But you can't just jump in here, get a bunch of mice, at the pet store and do this.
Why is it so expensive? Like, where does that money go for?
It goes to labs, it goes to personnel, it goes to housing, it goes to, clean labs, it goes to a lot of places. So up here, and you're looking at, I just give you an idea of the cancer experiments that I've done. And I've done a lot of stuff that have nothing to do with cancer, but we started out with cancer, and we started out with cancer because we had such good effects with it clinically, took it into the lab, had such good effects experimentally. And so what I've done is I've done a lot of cancer experiments with mice. I've done a lot of experiments not with mice, and I've done a lot of experiments not with cancer. So if you look at this, to give you some idea, again, you can't see my pointer, but it says City University of New York, 2 experiments. I just lost where I was.
Okay, you can go back.
Okay, two experiments at City University of New York, two experiments at St. Joseph's College, 1 at Arizona State, 3 at Indiana University, 5 at Brown University Medical School, and these are just on the mammary cancer. And then we've got sarcomas, which I did at University of Connecticut. I got oncogenic mice, the University of California in San Diego. Oncogenic mice are mice that you don't need to inject, they spontaneously develop cancer. Nude mice, don't worry, I won't show any nude mice pictures. Nude mice at Brown University, these are mice without immune systems. We've done extremely aggressive cancers at Wake Forest Med School, and we've just finished the effects of, I'm now doing research on healing without the healer. Can we reproduce this and make this a scalable proposition? So I just got finished doing experiments with breast cancer, bladder cancer, and melanomas at Tokyo University. And the research is ongoing. This isn't, I found this out, a long time ago. This is, I'm still trying to figure out what in heaven's name is going on.
Well, if you don't know what's going on, Bill, how could you actually heal? You need to have figured out what's going on first. Otherwise, healing's not going to take place. You're wasting your time.
Yeah, if only that were so.
And that's what you talk about. People are telling you. You have people telling you. Unless you find, what's the word? You figure out the not the method. There's another word. What's the
mechanism of action?
The mechanism of action. If you don't know that, then it's kind of a waste of time. And I know you're getting frustrated because you're still hearing that from people.
Well, I got to tell you, I just recently did an experiment on using a recording, which we may talk about when Dean gets here, but because I did this with Dean, the effect of a recording of healing. And we do the recording on healing, and then we play back the recording without the healer. And we have reliable effects on cancer cells. We have reliable effects in mice. We're trying to capture healing and make it scalable. So in any event, you see the plot of what I'm trying to do with some of the slides. So if I have the slide up now that says healing research major goals, now we're decades and decades and decades later. So the fact of mice getting cured of cancer, or the fact of people getting cured of cancer, isn't new. It's not particularly interesting. And I don't try to do the same thing over and over and over again. I do it for a while to see if we have a reliable effect, but we're trying to find other stuff. So the first bullet that's up there, what are the parameters of healing? Well, by parameters of healing, what are the things that matter? So, Joe, you're mentioning things like you got to believe or you got to be able to heal. Well, it turns out you don't. So does belief matter? That's a parameter of healing. Does distance matter? What are the things that enhance healing and what are the things that detract from healing? I've been studying this now for, 120 years. I've looked into the physiological correlates of healing. So I have a whole bunch of research using EEGs, and I have a bunch of research using functional MRIs. I've done deep dives into people's brains. I've done, see what happens when healing happens. The third bullet, the development of a theoretical model, I don't have a good one. So I'm telling you now, without shame, it's just life. Without shame, I don't understand how this stuff really works. And so the fourth bullet, I'm trying to develop practical applications. Can we capture and reproduce healing without the healer? In which case, who cares what you believe in? Doesn't make any difference at all.
Exactly, because people are like, if you're somebody who's sick and you have cancer and I go to Bill Bengston or one of your healers who trained underneath you and I get healed, I don't care how it works. I really don't care what's going on. All I care about is if I've gotten healed. And if I've gotten healed, that's all I care about. People will say, well, you changed your diet, your attitude changed. Fine. I don't care. I got healed.
That's right. So again, yeah, that's exactly right. The clinician is interested in the outcome. The experimentalist wants to know the mechanism. The client couldn't care. Just fix me. And that's real. So it depends who the audience is. Just let me go through a couple slides, then we can kill the slide thing, so we can look at each other. These are Joe. You read this, and it's all. I got a lot of experiments since 2010. So I'm about to start a sequel, I hope, and try to bring this up to date, because again, a lot of stuff has happened in the dozen years or so since. And for those people who are skeptical, and I hope it's everybody, if you want to go to my website, I'm just putting up 5 publications. I think I have about 35 of them, and these are geeky things to read. You don't want to take some of this stuff to the beach. This you can take to the beach because it's written in English for a lay audience. Some of this stuff is a little bit nutty, and it's technical and it's geeky and it's ugly and it's it sounds like you're writing up lab reports because we're writing up lab reports. But again, the research goes on. I've got 2 papers out for peer review right now, and it goes on. So we found a lot of stuff, and then we can kill the slides. This is reliable. When we talk about data over the course of the last 100 and something years I've been doing this, any of these dots I can back up with multiple experiments in multiple labs. So I'm a skeptic. So if I produce something in one lab, I got to reproduce it in another lab to make sure that it's not an artifact. It's nothing, it's not an odd quirk. It's something that really happens. And we can say even to my skeptical head, I have to say, first, cures abound. And we're not talking just cancer. We're talking cures are all over the freaking place. It's pretty interesting. And I can say distance is irrelevant. So I do mice experiments where the mice are 2 inches from me, and I replicate those experiments. The mice are at 2,000 miles. Same result.
That's when what I talked to you about the other day, holographic universe. This is all an illusion. There really is no distance. That's the theory. I think that's accurate. There is no distance. That's why particles separated by 1,000,000 miles, instantaneous communication, faster than the speed of light. Well, there is no distance. I think that's where we're going. Obviously, we can't prove that. Do you have any thoughts on that? That would be the holographic universe model.
Well, the distance thing is really taxing for someone like myself, because when you talk about the holographic universe and all of that, I've started to look into it a little bit, and at least metaphorically, there are patterns, that I can't disagree with you, but whether the universe is holographic is past my pay grade. I mean, so I'm going to be really cautious. But I would say that, at least metaphorically, it's consistent. It's consistent. Distance is irrelevant. And I can say with certainty, as much as you can say with anything with certainty, I can say with certainty that distance is irrelevant. And what that brings up an interesting problem. If distance is irrelevant, then it can't be energy. Now, I understand I have a book called The Energy Cure. And there's a certain hypocrisy here. But I went to, when I saw this cover for the first time, and I saw the title, The Energy Cure, I said to Sounds True, I don't like the title because I don't think there's any energy in healing. And they said, thanks for your input.
Yeah, we don't care.
Sorry. We don't care, but thanks for weighing in, but we don't really care. So there's a problem. If distance is irrelevant, it can't be energy. Whether it can be a holographic something, I don't know, past my pay grade, but it can't be energy. Energy diminishes with distance.
Right.
So, if you got a sound and you move away, it gets dimmer. You got a light, you move away, it gets dimmer. It's a pretty simple formula too. The energy diminishes with distance.
Another really interesting part is the more mice, the stronger the effect. Is that accurate? And
yeah,
have you ever looked at, I don't think you have, the more healers, because I've been part of healing groups where it's more healers with one person being healed. And I tried to get the person who's a pretty well-known name information passed on to say, no, don't use more healers. Use more people who need healing to see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would matter. I suspect more healers doesn't have an additive effect, but it has an increasing effect to a certain length of time or a certain number of healers. But I think that healing primarily comes from the healee. And so I think there's probably a process of healing that it's up to the healee's body to figure out. And they're taking information, they're not taking energy. I mean, it's speculative on my part. I can't put it up here and say it is information rather than energy because I can't prove that. I can prove to you distance is irrelevant. I can prove to you cures are all over the place. I can prove to you dose response. There is a dose response, meaning healing isn't a miracle. It doesn't, you wave your magic wand and everything is fine. It doesn't work that way. There is a minimum amount of treatment. We've cut way back, trying to see, and some of the mice start to get squirrely when you cut way back. I can tell you that healing, although it doesn't conform to distance parameters, is not a field effect. Meaning, I don't put out healing vibes and they cover a geographical area, and anything within that vibe is going to be affected. It's much more complex than that. There's not a generic field effect, and I could show you interesting experiments, but it's not a generic field effect. It seems to actually target, so consciousness is in there somehow. A specific target is in there somehow, and it can skip anything in the middle and then hit a target on the other side. So if we put a bunch of mice here and a bunch of mice here who are the actual target, it'll hit the target without affecting the other mice.
And it's similar. And when I hear that, it's similar to remote viewing. You give remote viewers a number, somehow whatever part of the person, whether it's the quantum part of the person, the holographic person, the subconscious part of the person, it knows what you want. It knows what you're going for. And that's not, you don't always get accurate information, but when you are, it's like dead on. Somehow some part of you knows. And just like you said, some part of you knows which mice you want healed.
Something happens. Yeah, something happens and it's targeted. And remote viewing can get crazier too, because in remote viewing too, distance is irrelevant. And if distance is irrelevant and you're a general relativity fan, time should be irrelevant. And in the case of remote viewing, it is irrelevant. So you can remote view an image that hasn't been selected yet. And that you get the same hit rate.
Time is an illusion, Bill. That's what I'm learning. Time is an illusion. Distance is an illusion. I think it's the most exciting time right now because more people are talking about that, mainstream scientists. But let me get to a question. Did you have anything to do with healing Mark Hoppus of Blink 182? Do you know about
Did I
him?
have anything to do?
Yeah. Do you connect it to that whatsoever?
Not that I
Because
know.
Tom DeLonge, who leads the band, has mentioned your work before without mentioning your name. And Mark Hoppus had cancers. He's a bass player of Blink 182. So somebody wanted to know if you were involved at all.
Yeah, and if I was involved, I wouldn't tell you.
Right. Figured that. Thank you for answering that. Another question. Somebody wants to know, are the offspring of mice that have been healed, are they immune to cancer?
That's a beautiful question. The answer is going to be I don't know, but it's on the drawing board to test. When I did work at Wake Forest Medical School, I was looking for a couple of things. One, an extremely aggressive form of cancer to see what would happen, but secondly, the guy in charge of the lab there had discovered mice which were immune to cancer, which is pretty interesting. And so he was making a bunch of mice for an experiment that he was doing at Wake Forest, and injecting mice with cancer and all this. And again, it's ugly work. And he found a couple of mice that the injections didn't take. And a normal person would say, oh, that's either a bad mouse or a bad batch of cancer or a bad whatever. But he tried it again on these mice. They couldn't get cancer. And then he bred them. And when he bred them, they had you've seen genetic charts and all that stuff. It followed a pattern like this is inheritable. And some of the mice, the offspring of these spontaneously immune mice, couldn't get cancer, and their kids couldn't get cancer. Some got it, some didn't get it, but it followed a kind of a normal genetic kind of markers. And so he spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to unravel that. And as far as I'm aware, he has not been able to unravel it yet.
Interesting.
So long-winded way of saying, no, I haven't tried this yet. I haven't tried this yet on inbred mice. I can tell you that mice which are cured are immune to the cancer for the rest of their life. And so something real is going on, and I have some mechanism of action stuff here on the immune system. I'm not gonna go into it's a little on the geeky side, but we've done genomic kinds of studies on what the mechanism of action might be, and does it follow this line and that line. And mice which are cured can't be given cancer again. And it's more than that. We can take mice from those cured mice, put it into a sick mouse, and it'll cure that mouse without any healing intervention. And so what is likely is that we have some sort of a stimulated immune response that may be, in fact, able to be turned into something akin to a vaccine.
Yeah, that's the exciting part, which we'll get to more when Dean comes here. I had a question from Jessica asking about some of your methods. Do you think they could also be used the other way, negatively? Kind of like people who are involved in Wicca or putting spells on people using it for negative. I mean, have you ever thought about that?
I've thought about it. I wouldn't want to take part in an experiment where we were trying to do something negative. You could always make a case that you're doing something negative when you're doing healing research. You know, I mean, I'm injecting mice with cancer, for crying out loud. That's not a good thing. You know, and then we rationalize it after. But I don't think it would be a smart thing to do to bring about a negative effect. But I've never tried it. I've never tried it formally.
When did you realize that your healing method allegedly also is a manifesting method, which I know it's really impossible. It's really, as far as I know, it's really impossible to prove that manifesting is real. You could say, oh, he got the car he wanted, but that can come from so many places. But when along the lines, when did you realize, you know, it seems like the healing method is also getting me things that I have on my list. And for people who don't know, it's in the notes. I have a link to the method, which is available online. There's a link in there. So, Bill, any idea when you figured it out? Or
very early on.
Early on?
Very early on. So the cycling technique, which turns out to be a manifesting technique, I never had heard of the word manifest, but it is a manifesting technique, was recognized pretty early on. And the healing could be one of the things you're trying to manifest. And I think that when you're healing or you're cycling and you're doing, I think you may be healing trying to fix somebody else, but I think healing, you're also giving yourself a treatment. And that's among the reasons I wouldn't be a big fan of doing something negative.
Which answers this question, which somebody said, what's the effect on the healer? Can we use this to heal ourselves? Yes.
Yes. It's harder, though. It's hard to heal yourself because there's a certain amount of detachment involved. If I go to, and actually let me go to my middle bullet here. Belief is irrelevant. I think belief is all things being equal. Famous statistical cop-out, but all things being equal, I think belief is a little bit negative. People who believe stuff, I'm not a believer, people who believe stuff spend a lot of time reinforcing their own beliefs. And the believers don't want to be talked out of their position. Skeptics are open. A believer, nah. And so if you're a believer and you're trying to heal, it's almost like you take this personally, and there's a tendency to try. And a tendency to try or to focus or to bring about your conscious mind involved in healing doesn't help the process at all. Healing is more and more an autonomic response to the need of the healee, rather than the belief reinforcement of either the healer or the healee.
That made me think again about remote viewing. Some of the targets, maybe if the target is something that's really important, like we need to find out where this hostage is located, otherwise they're going to be killed in the next week. That's a really important need. I'm not sure if there's any data that shows the remote viewing is more accurate when the need is that extreme, or when it's just a target, a waterfall target.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. Yeah, I don't know. But in the case of healing, and going back to the question, can you heal yourself? It's hard because healing involves a certain amount of detachment rather than focus, rather than trying, rather than concentration, rather than being present. And it's
your most important instruction when I took your class, your manifesting healing classes, have fun. Try out different things. If there's no wrong answers. Somebody asked me, does he recommend playing videos of your images to help you with the manifesting? And like, yeah, whatever works for you works.
Yeah, and then don't fall into a rut. So the trick is how to be playful and how to avoid ritual.
And for people who don't know what we're talking about, basically, Bill asks you to come up with 20 items on a list. As an example, I have a broken leg. I want my leg to heal. So I imagine myself running around on a track. That means my leg is healed. You come up with 20 items like that and you cycle through them really fast until it becomes a blur. That's basically the system, just so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the plot.
So what do doctors, oncologists, what do they say to you when you lecture to them, when you get them private in a conversation?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. I've spoken to skeptic societies where I generally insult them. I start out by insulting them and say I'm the only skeptic in the room. And then they get all twisted and make contorted faces and such. And I say I'm the only skeptic in the room because I don't know the truth. You people already know the truth. You already know that what I haven't yet said is wrong. And you already believe that I'm wrong, and you don't even know what I'm going to say. And then at the end of a talk, you have a social constraint. You don't want to be seen with the crazy person. So people will go out of their way to come by and whisper in my ear, that was great. But they don't want to say it out loud because there's too much peer pressure. You're trying to be part of this tribe, the tribe that alleges to be skeptical. They're not skeptical, they're believers. And then some crazy person comes in. I've given talks in departments of oncology in medical schools and had people, 75 oncologists down the hall in extra meeting rooms. They had to set up, and beam in the talk. I've had these people try to cut my knees out for hours, and at the end I generally get a standing ovation because they go, we can't find a flaw in what you're doing. Now that doesn't mean they're going to follow up with it. It just means I'm very well received.
I want to talk about something that's one of the most fascinating things to me, placebo effect, because I'm pretty sure you do not believe it's mind over matter.
No, I think placebo effect is an actual resonant connection of spatially separate groups. And that was gobbledygook, but in placebos, if you do an experiment, there's a certain series of assumptions that you're making when you do an experiment. So we may go into the lab and say, well, this is tightly controlled and all that stuff. But the reality is there's a series of assumptions. If you're doing an experiment, one of the assumptions is if you're physically separate, you're independent. If there's resonant bonding, and I can connect with you, and I can demonstrate that we can physiologically connect from a distance. I can show our brains going into resonance, for example. If I can show that I'm connected to you and you stick a pin in me, you may jump. I don't think that's necessarily suggestion. I think it's an actual physical resonant bonding. And bonding, everybody here has experienced bonding. You felt a connection, you felt a disconnection. And it could be the same thing. It could be your dog. You love your dog on Monday, you hate your dog on Tuesday. What changed? It's not the dog. It's the connection you have.
I always love my dog, Bill. There are no days I don't love my dog. You could say my ex-wives, or you could say a girlfriend or a friend.
I'll let you make the list of what you're supposed to do or not.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about. Whether it's even if it's not your dog, it's your ex-wife. You have a connection one day, you have a disconnection, and you can have a connection or a disconnection to people, to places, to things, to ideas. And I think healing is a connection. But I think placebo effects are really an example of connections going on all over the place. So let's say we're doing a drug trial. Sorry. I don't know how to turn this off. I think I got it. If you're doing a drug trial and you have a group of people, a group of volunteers, and half of them get a drug and half get a placebo, the placebo may not be completely independent of the drug people. If they're bonded and one group takes a drug, I think there's going to be an effect on the other. I don't think, I'm reasonably confident. I get placebo effects that exactly mirror what happens in people, but I get them in mice, I get them in cell cultures, I get them all over the place. I don't think cell cultures are particularly suggestible. I'm reasonably confident that mice are not particularly suggestible, but if I have bonded mice and I treat one, I'm going to also be treating the controls.
What's the dirty little secret that you've spoken about, which I did not know about, with placebo effects?
Oh, there's a bunch of dirty little secrets. Among them is as the number of people in a study get bigger, the placebo effect gets stronger.
That shouldn't happen.
That shouldn't happen. There's no way to make that right. So let's say we're doing a drug trial and we go to the different stages and phases and all that stuff of drug trial. You have a small test for safety, and we call phase 2. And then we have a larger clinical trial, phase 3. Well, what happens is the placebo effect gets stronger on replication, and the placebo effect gets stronger as the sample size gets larger. That can't be psychological. In the case of mice, the more mice we have in an experiment, the faster they collectively get healed. It's all consistent.
And I don't know if you just said, I might have just missed it if I was distracted on questions, but what I know, did you talk about how sometimes the drug, if you increase the drug, the placebo effect goes up X amount
It
exactly?
goes up proportionate.
That
So
shouldn't
I
happen.
take a drug. It's another dirty. There's a bunch of dirty little secrets, but here's another dirty little secret. You have X drug, which produces X effect, and then you up it to 2X drug. You're going to get 2X placebo effect. It goes proportionate to the strength of the drug used in the other group.
And that shouldn't happen because the people getting the placebo do not know that the
They
drug.
don't know what they're getting. They don't know what they're getting, and they don't know the dose.
So do the people who work in those studies just ignore it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be screwy to think that physical separation means independence, or it doesn't mean independence. You're over here, I'm over there. You stick a pin in me, it's not going to affect you. Well, what if it does?
Right.
So if you get placebo effects that look like human effects in mice, you got to scratch your head and say, maybe it's not suggestion. You get placebo effects in cell cultures, maybe it's not suggestion.
It's not suggestion. There's no way, unless the mice are reading your mind and realizing, you know what? I think Bill just gave me some healing. Yeah, it's ridiculous. What's the percentage healing success rate? How many mice or people do not get healed?
The people, it's hard to. I just put up a new slide that says what we don't know. You know, this is going to be much longer than what we know. The percentage of mice, we've had a couple of failures of mice. I don't have a figure off the top. I would say for total lifespan cure, it's probably about 95%. A little higher, but you know, in that range. In the case of people, I don't know, because I don't have, this is one of the reasons you go into the lab, you don't have a steady denominator. You can't follow a certain number of people and then say what percentage got cured, because in the case of clinical stuff, people say they leave, you know, they get a treatment, and what happens if they don't come back? I don't know. And that's called a file drawer problem. People disappear, and what happens to them? What happens to them 10 years after they were allegedly cured? I don't know. So I can't give you a success rate on clinical stuff. I would just say, for those people who take treatment and will come back and keep taking treatment, it's got to be very high that they're fixed. But I can't give you a figure. It'd be crazy.
Something we could talk about when Dean gets here: quantum entanglement, double slit experiment, connected to all of this.
Yeah, that's the. I'll let Dean prattle on about that.
Okay.
I would say, at least metaphorically, there is, because there's metaphorically something similar to quantum things. People use the word quantum excessively. Dean uses it appropriately. He is a seriously knowledgeable guy in terms of quantum effects and things along those lines. So I wouldn't, if he's coming, I wouldn't presume to speculate.
All right. Bill, I do a lot of UFO work. That's my main work, although that's going to change because I love this stuff and I love holographic universe. That's in the simulation theory. Let me just, I don't know, you don't want to talk about this, but feel free. But so Jim Semivan is a big name in this field. He is a former CIA spy. He was pretty high up in the CIA, respected. He's spoken about his abduction experience. He's spoken about seeing a hooded being come through a wall. At the same time, his friend died down in Florida, maybe a connection. Then we have a Stanford University immunologist, Gary Nolan, who has spoken about having little men in his bedroom when he was younger, seeing a UFO. So more people are starting to talk about anomalous experiences. Are you able to share your experiences with the fellas, what you write about? And I know in the past you haven't wanted to go there, but maybe now?
Well, I mean, I don't hide it. I don't dwell on it because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I don't know what to do. But there are, I don't know what you want to call it, identifiable spooky things that go on. I can see figures of people from time to time. You certainly can have a sense that they're there. And we just started to call them the fellas, hi fellas, how's it going? When we had a dog, The dog used to sit and watch where the fellas are. I mean, we didn't make it a major, it's not a big intense thing going on here. It's like, oh yeah, they're the fellas, kind of a thing. I can tell you this, I was giving a talk in Germany once, and I had this literally a little old lady, I mean, coming up in a walker kind of a thing. And she said, I'm a psychic. And I said, okay. And she goes, no, I'm really a psychic. And I said, I believe you. And she said, well, and she started to stammer a little bit. And she said, I just want to tell you that there's a bunch of people who are following you around. I said, yeah, those are the fellas. And she said, but there's a lot of them. I've never seen so many. I said, okay, tell them I said hello, and she went back to her chair for the next part of whatever the talk was. So other people have seen these whatever they are soon.
So if that's real, and these people, and I know you've said you've seen the fellows with other people, other witnesses at the same time. If that's real, it really says something. If they're real non-human intelligences from maybe another dimension, just something non-physical, maybe human, but just non-physical, we may be having some help from the other side, is basically what it suggests.
Yeah, again, past my pay grade. I'm just a dork in the lab, trying to figure stuff out and making lists like I have up here, stuff we don't know. And how do we get the answer to that? Some questions are interesting. Some questions are curious. Some questions, I got nothing, I don't know what to do. The list of stuff we don't know is pretty long, including the fellas.
One thing you spoke about, when you do get volunteers to heal, you look for skeptics. You don't look for believers. If they're believers, you don't want them.
I don't want them. The believers are a little scary to me because, again, they believe stuff, and they believe that people with strong beliefs have a tendency to want to reinforce their beliefs.
Somebody asked.
I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about. I pretend. I don't pretend. I have lots of data on lots of experiments under lots of tightly controlled conditions. And so I can say something. Some things aren't interesting, like, is healing real? I mean, it's a stupid question. The question is there a dose response? Does distance matter? What happens physiologically? Those are interesting questions, not whether healing happens. But the list of things we don't know is staggering, and this could go on page after page after page. And believers don't have a tendency to want to look at all this stuff because they already believe stuff.
Right.
I'm fortunate enough that I don't have a believing bone in my body, so I can relax and just let the data go where the data goes, and I can be an interested observer.
That's the way. I think everybody should be like that. Has a question about the fellows. Do they look human?
I'm going to stop sharing this and just. Okay. Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. Do they look? They look humanoid. They almost like a caricature of a ghost. I can't see details of faces or things like that. They kind of loom. I can't get them to pay rent. I thought I'd set up reasonable amounts of rent because they just hang out here. Do something.
Freeloaders.
Yeah, go rake some leaves. Do something, for crying out loud. Instead of just looming around. You're annoying.
Question on Twitter. Any chance you could ask Bill his method's effectiveness on neurodegenerative illnesses? I have wondered if its effect, your method has, if your method is effect, if its effect is special on fast-moving illnesses that mutated cells versus an illness that takes away degenerative.
I can talk. The answer is always going to be I don't know, and then we say let's try and find out. Let's see what we get. So I'm open to let's see what we get. In clinical, because you're asking me a clinical question. In clinical questions, in clinical cases, there's no way to predict an individual outcome any more than I could predict the individual outcome of a mouse. So, for example, and this may not be satisfying, but it's reality. And this is a real case.
And I'll bring Dean in 1 minute. So if we wrap it up, and I'll bring him in.
Okay, and you can pop him in anytime you want. But we have
Dean.
Hey, Dean.
We're in the middle of Bill answering a question. Go ahead, Bill.
He's answering it poorly, incidentally, but I'll give the answer. You try to figure out what the question was. Yeah. So we can have a volunteer healer put their hands around a cage with 2 mice in it, and so the mice are essentially clones, not literally, but they're clones of one another. They're for all practical purposes, they're identical. You have the same healer. You have mice that are been born and raised together. They're from the same litter, and they're given the same amount of cancer at a given time. So they're injected with a certain number of cancer cells. One mouse will take X number of days to be cured. The other mouse will take 2.5X. Now, the geeky term for that is unexplained variance. But the reality is we can speak in terms of aggregate data, central tendencies, things like that, but there's no way for me to predict the outcome of an individual mouse. Will this be a mouse that gets fixed in a dozen days? Will it be a mouse that takes 30 days? Will it be I don't know. And you asked me a clinical case, does it work on this? It's not a question of does it work on this, it's a question of even if I got 10 people with the same condition, at least as far as we could tell, there would probably be variation in the outcome of the healing. And we just, geeks call that unexplained variance. It's what it really means is there really is no way. We think and we hear in terms of central tendencies. So this will get fixed in about a month, or this will take, but there's an enormous amount of individual variation.
Thank you for that. And Dean, thank you for being here. I will refer people to the notes for Dean's bio. He's the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Scientists at Noetic Science. And Dean, can you tell me, thank you for being here, first of all. Tell me how you and Bill met.
I think we probably met at an SSE conference.
I think so. I was trying to remember. How did we meet?
Probably years ago.
Yeah, bunch of years.
20 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
So at a conference.
What was your first impression?
You want me to sign off?
Hold your ears, Bill.
Yeah, I would say what Bill has been doing and presenting is crazy, but it's good crazy. Just like is it John Lewis who was talking about good trouble? Well, in a sense, that's what we do. We're involved in good trouble in a scientific sense, studying things that would cause many scientists to run away and scream. And so instead we dive in and find out, is there something here or not? So one of my intellectual heroes is William James. William James really had it right when he said way back when that it's the things that don't fit into our current understanding, which are somewhere between the next great breakthrough and something which is a mistake.
Yep.
So you're not going to find out which one it is unless you actually start studying it. And it often turns out that the strange things that people don't understand hold something which is extremely important to know. So that's what attracted me to studying anomalies. And that's why I value what Bill does as well, because he dived headfirst into it and now he's in it.
And I don't have, this goes to my thing about belief. I don't have beliefs that I need to defend. What I've learned in doing, research in this crazy stuff for 100-something years is I don't know too much. It's just the list of things I don't know, and so I can't believe because I don't come from a believing background. I just test, and I'm okay if it works. If it doesn't work, I'm sure I don't have the answer, and I don't have truth. I have experience and I have experiment, and it will continue to be modified. And the good news is in the dialogue, someone like Dean can come along and say, time out. Have you tried this? Have you controlled for that? Have you? And if it's Dean, it's going to be useful. If it's other people, it's stupid. That's not useful. That's not useful at all. which is one of the reasons I try to stay clear of believers.
Yeah, constructive criticism is essential and valuable.
Yeah.
Destructive criticism is a waste of time.
Yep.
Dean, can you talk about how you got involved with Bill's research, and talk about, both of you can talk about how you started trying to record healing? Who was the first one to even think about the idea of maybe we can record this?
Who's the first?
Yeah. Well, who came up with the idea? Let's try to record, put as many instruments, since we don't really know what we're recording, and go in a Faraday cage and try to record healing.
Well, I know that the way I first heard about this was we wanted to put Bill in a bottle, because we're finite. Whereas if you put Bill in a bottle, it might stay on the shelf for a long time, and we don't need Bill anymore.
That's one of my major goals in life, is to be irrelevant
and be put in a bottle. Yeah. So, and the question then was, well, what do you record? Well, I thought of everything I could think of to record: electromagnetic and magnetic and scalar waves, even though I don't know exactly what that means, and lots of things. And so we created a system that would record at high resolution all of these signals, something like 38, 39 different signals, and then created a single composite stereo audio signal out of it. And it works. So why it works? Well, that will take another 400 years and 3,000 people to figure out. But something about it, we captured something.
But Joe, I mean, if you put Dean's answer into context, why are we doing this? If someone comes along, we'll just call it Healer A. Healer A comes along, does their hocus pocus shtick, and I'm not putting it down. Does their hocus pocus shtick, and the person gets better, the mouse gets better, the cell gets better, whatever gets better. It's a beautiful thing, and you can study that as kind of like the way to proceed. But in the grand scheme, if you're going to make this stuff adaptable to there's an inexhaustible supply of people in pain out there. So no matter how many people there are putting their hands on or doing their healing stick, there's going to be a need that's greater. And the question is, do we have something that's curious because it's a phenomenon that shouldn't be, but it be? But how do we make it practical? Well, we have to be able to store it, and we have to be able to scale it. And so, I mean, we're used to storing and scaling all sorts of stuff from the physical world, from the medical world. I mean, if you just take vitamins, for crying out loud, we can mass produce vitamins, and they sit and they store for some length of time. Well, I can pop in some vitamins if I need some vitamins. Can we do the same thing? We take electricity, and we put it in a box. We call it a battery, and we can mass produce the battery. Well, that's a whole lot better than going, I wonder what that sparky thing is. So the sparky thing is worth looking into for its own sake. But if we can capture it and scale it, you don't see people walking around going, I don't believe in electricity. I don't think you could have an electrical powered car. I don't think we have. Well, why? It's been stored and scaled. Can we store and scale healing? And the answer is yes. That's not the same as saying we've duplicated it, but there is a technology possible.
And just so people know, you're putting one healer in a Faraday cage, multiple healers. They're doing your technique, and then you're recording what goes on in the room.
We have 3 people.
3 healers?
3 people doing my technique.
Okay.
I was one of them. I won't out the other 2.
Okay. And it's not, so the results so far, it's not as good as the hands-on technique, but I don't
think so.
There is an effect, though.
There is an effect, and so, to your first question, Dean went geeking around trying to figure out let's throw the kitchen sink at this and get 38 detectors, and even if we don't, we got scalar fields, whatever in heaven's name that means. And it's a kitchen sink approach because we don't know what we're doing, and will the kitchen sink played back reproduce the effect? And I think the answer is no. It'll reproduce some effect, but I don't think it's equal to.
Yeah, the fact that it works at all is already astonishing, because there is, when you look at the signals, There's very minor changes that go on at a low frequency, but otherwise we have no idea what it's captured. I mean, it could be anything at this point. What makes it worse is that we used a pretty sophisticated system to do all this recording, and at least anecdotally, we know that even a little simple, cheap digital recorder that only does audio also seems to record something.
Yeah.
So, so the way that where we are at this point is somewhere between Benjamin Franklin fooling around with sparks during an electrical storm, or Alexander Fleming noticing that this pot of penicillin, which had no name yet, but some mold was doing something interesting. So we see that there are effects. We don't know nearly enough yet to know really even how to think about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet the ranch on the recording, but there's clearly something goes on, and we have this under some pretty good replications, multiple replications, and in indirect, we don't have a chargeometer, a helometer, and all these other kinds of good things that haven't been able to figure out how to map this thing out yet. So we've done it indirectly, hands-on. And this is cell cultures, hands-on cell cultures. When do the genomic changes start to kick in if they're cancer cells? The recording on the same cells, when does it kick in? And the recording kicks in, but it kicks in slower. And I don't know if we can really make a ratio, but it kicks in, we'll just call it kicks in slower than does the hands-on. And Dean says, we can try it with other stuff, and we have. And we've done it with studio recordings. We've tried it. I haven't done the genomics yet on just ordinary cell phone recordings. But it'd be nice to have a little hierarchy of, what condition. Give us a hint. What are the things that matter? Just like it'd be nice to say, Dean, stop looking at all the stuff you're looking at. Let's change the recorder. Let's change this. Let's change it and see what happens. That takes time, effort, money, and putting everything else on hold. Is it worth doing? Absolutely. Will we come up with penicillin? Don't know. Could be a false flag, and we may not be thinking of this the right way to begin with.
Yeah. So normally, what you'd find, if something is found, it's efficacious. You throw a lot of people and a lot of money at it, and that's how you learn things.
Yeah.
We have very little money, very few people, and so.
A long list of things that we want to look at.
Yeah, like an entire career could be spent easily on this stuff, and probably should be, because I think many of us are coming to the idea that what we're dealing with is some aspect of information rather than energetics, and that's why you can capture whatever this thing is in different people and maybe machines and so on. You can do that. Which doesn't make any sense from a force-like perspective. It makes a lot of sense from an informational perspective. And then once you adopt that idea, it becomes very strange very quick, because now suddenly things like symbols, which carry a certain degree of meaning to them, and meaning and information are closely related to each other. Well, give somebody a symbol of something and maybe they'll get better.
Yep.
Well, that's like completely crazy. That's not science anymore. But I think that there is a science there. We don't have enough resources to dive into it and really figure out what's going on.
And we really don't have a handle on how widespread whatever X is distributed. I mean, maybe I get my findings, which are reasonably interesting, because I'm the only one stupid enough to do it. I haven't learned enough to know that what I'm doing is crazy talk. And there may be all sorts of different ways to skin a cat. So Dean puts in 38 detectors. If we try with a different, maybe we'll get the same thing. A lot of work to be done.
Yeah. So we also know some things don't work. So one of the things that we tried when we did that original recording was using a spectrometer to see if we could see changes in quartz crystals and in cotton and a bunch of other things, and didn't see any change at all.
Yep. And I'm still thinking that healing is still stimulated by the healee.
Yeah, there's an underlying need that needs to take place.
Underlying need,
Yeah.
And so the underlying need is the driver. So if you just had a gizmo, technical term, if you just had a gizmo that's measuring this or that gizzy, it may not be the route to take. So far, seems to be life in need.
Yeah, this is why I'm becoming a fan of dual aspect monism as a worldview, because the idea of it is that it says mind is a real thing, matter is a real thing. They're emerging out of something else, but the connection then between mind and matter is meaning. That's what makes the connection powerful,
Yep.
because the correlation is always there, but to make it do something, there's some meaning that needs to be underneath it.
Yep.
Dean, what do you think about something for me? It's not new, but it's new to me. So the idea that we live in a holographic universe and the possibility that we're living in a simulation. Have you thought about those two ideas?
Yeah, I don't know what to do with those. I mean, if there was a way to specifically test it, and I know that Tom Campbell and others are trying to figure out a way of doing that, then it becomes more interesting. But otherwise, it becomes an interesting theory. It's a nice story, but I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, my way of saying that is it's past my pay grade. It's got a good beat. It's fun to dance to. It could have, give me some metaphorical thing to grab onto, but I don't know what to do with it past that.
And so I do view this as a metaphor,
Yeah.
right? The idea of a simulation as a metaphor, I like that. As literally true, I'm not sure I know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Do you have any doubt that Bill has proven with his multiple experiments that his method can cure cancer in mice?
I have doubt about everything.
Good.
Do I think that do I think Bill is onto something real and valuable? Yes. Do I have doubts? Of course I have doubts.
I would hope you had doubts, because otherwise we couldn't talk anymore, because you'd become a believer.
Yeah.
What would your doubts be, though? Like, you have doubts about his methodology, or nobody else replicating it?
It's the same doubts that people would have with the kind of research that I do, right? We begin to gain confidence when we see lots of independent replications.
Yep.
That's why we can say within cyber search that we were very high confidence that telepathy is real. Why? Because there's like over 100 publications, 20 laboratories, been done for 50 years. But Bill is unique. What I'm doing is some of the research, like with double slit optical systems. So far, there's only one person who's replicated it and is got some of the results similar to what I've seen, but other results too. So maybe after 20 different laboratories start showing replications, then our confidence continues to grow.
Yep.
Can you talk about the double slit experiment that you've been working on? Because I just discovered it. I didn't realize you had been doing that for the past few years. Just basically, what are you trying to do?
Well, so one of the main mysteries in quantum mechanics is, why does observing a quantum system cause that system to change its behavior? And the easiest way of demonstrating that is with a double slit optical system, because the design of it is you send photons through two little slits. These are microns across. And if you don't know which are the two slits that the photon goes through, then you will end up with an interference pattern, which suggests that the photon is behaving like a wave. It's easy to show that. If you do know which of the two slits that the photon goes through, it no longer acts like a wave, it acts like a particle. This is like physics 101. You can show this in any physics lab. So the founders of quantum mechanics were worried about this and came up with what the general phrase is the quantum measurement problem. Why is it that measuring a quantum system changes it? Because that is not the case with classical physics. So people like John von Neumann and many other physicists said that you need something that is non-physical in order to change the system. Because every time you do something physical, any physical measurement is simply a more complicated quantum system. It doesn't collapse, so-called, from its potential state into an actual state. So all we did was, I did a replication of a study that was done originally at Princeton University and at York University in 1998. And so I replicated it using new equipment that we built, a double slit optical system. And we simply asked people to imagine with their mind that they could see what was going on. with the photons. And if they could get the information, it would change the interference pattern in a predictable way. So we did that. We ended up doing 19 experiments over 10 years or so. And you add on the other studies, I figured there's roughly 28, 29 studies that have been done, including the original ones and then the ones that our colleague in Brazil had done. And the overall results show a probability of 10 to the minus 11th that something interesting is happening. So only 4 laboratories so far have tried to do this. For something this radically important for understanding the fundamentals of physics, you would need many, many more labs, many more people doing this kind of experiment for us, because if it's true, it is showing directly your mind is getting clairvoyant information about photons at a distance. Well, that troubles people. Doesn't trouble me. But,
I love it.
yeah.
Just because we're limited on time, I am going to move on to the water, because the water experiments and the homeopathic style treatment that Bill's involved in, I'm not sure if you're involved in that too, Dean. We'll start out with a question. I know, Dean, you are, and I'm sure, Bill, you probably are. Are you familiar with the experiments of consciousness on water by Dr. Mizuru Emoto? And then we'll go into the homeopathic style experiments that are going on now. Start out with you, Dean.
Well, Dean did some replications of Emoto.
Yeah, we worked with Emoto.
Yeah.
He came to IONS one time and gave a talk about his usual spiel. And I went up afterwards and said, this is really interesting, but have you ever done it under double-blind conditions so that the person who was taking pictures of the crystal did not know whether it had been, quote, treated or not treated? He said, no, he didn't do that. I said, well, do you want to? I said, sure. So we did 2 experiments where we had the water. People in Japan were trying to influence it at a distance. We sent that water back to Emoto in Tokyo, along with control water, which had not been part of the experiment, but came from the same source. And then the technician took a bunch of pictures. We posted the pictures online and had people judge the aesthetic beauty of the crystals, because that was his claim, that they would be more beautiful. And we found significant differences along the lines of what he had reported. Nowhere near as good as the pictures that he showed, but that's, as Bill was saying before, it's because there's very high variance whenever you do any experiment. And that's true in this case as well, but from a statistical point of view, the crystals that had been the subject of intention were more beautiful, as judged by lots of people, than the control water. So that's one line of studies. Meanwhile, over the last maybe 6 or 8 years already, with a colleague in Taiwan, we've been doing experiments with water where we asked 3 senior Buddhist monks at a Buddhist temple in Taiwan, to imprint into the water a certain positive intention. So it depends on the nature of the experiment. We've done imprint the water so that these seeds grow better, and they did very significantly. And now do the same thing, only we're going to look at stem cells to see if stem cells grow better. They do. And even something simpler like, for this tea made out of the water, would it change people's mood? Would they be happier if they had this tea versus identical tea, which was not blessed by them? And the answer is, yeah, that worked too. So water seems to capture something, change. And then in a larger scale study with 17 healers, kind of like Bill, but a wide variety of different kinds of healers, and 190 sessions with different clients, we looked at the changes in water structure with a spectroscopy system and found significant differences in the primary absorption rate, or the infrared portion of the spectrum for water, which is the one that absorbs most of the light, showed a significant difference when they were doing the healing versus not doing the healing. So something funny goes on with water.
Very interesting with water. And Bill, please tell me what you're doing now with your experiments with water related to homeopathic style
It's not related to homeopathy. I'm not a homeopath. I can barely spell homeopathy, and I'm ripping off methods that people use who are trying to do things that are similar to what I'm trying to do. So in homeopathy, you have serious dilution of an original substance, and the homeopathic model basically says the more dilutions you have, the stronger it gets, which is counterintuitive to a Western canon. As you dilute something, you dilute something, you dilute something with succussion in between, it's alleged to get stronger. And this goes to my larger question of what method, what system can we come up with that will both allow us to store and allow us to scale? Something can be storable, but not scalable. Something can be scalable, but maybe it's not storable. So just before we go down Gobbledygook Road, what we just asked the question before, is the recording that Dean and I made, is it as good as live? I don't think so, but it's wildly scalable. So the recording could be globally scaled immediately. If we upload this thing into the cloud and we send it out, and if it would do the whatever and replicate the healing, we would have global healing. So a recording is a nice way to go, and this goes back to an earlier question: why do you go down this road? Let's see if we can if we can store as well as globally scale. Thank you and good night, and then we can just play with it as a technical problem. Something can be storable, but not necessarily scalable. So, for example, the great Bernard Grad, as far as I know, started the experiments on cotton with the Hungarian healer Oscar Estebany. And so I actually have a piece of cotton right here if we're doing show and tell. This is Grad now discovering that Estebany could hold a piece of cotton, and the piece of cotton applied to a plant, an animal, a wounded this, a sick that, would replicate what happens when you do something live. Well, I've done those experiments with charged cotton, done this in vitro with cancer cells, and we compare what happens when you do a live treatment of cancer cells in vitro versus you put the cancer cells near or on charged cotton. So we have blinded some cotton that's charged, some cotton that's not charged, and we bring cancer cells near to this piece of cotton. If the cotton is uncharged, it's not a surprise, nothing happens to the cancer cells. If the cotton has been charged, I'm using charged loosely, like Dean is using blessed loosely. If the cotton has been charged, blessed, whatever term you want, as the cancer cells get near the charged cotton, there are genomic changes which are measurable. That's a charge-o-meter, but it's not something that you're going to take home. It's not something that's going to be simple. So we did this kind of stuff at Brown University and did it over and over and over again, and we get genomic changes in the cancer cells as they get near charged cotton. Storable, but that doesn't mean it's scalable. So we would have the phenomenon of, yep, something's going on with the cotton, or yep, something's going on with water. And so let's say we treat water and we do an experiment on water. Well, I'll give you an experiment I did at the University of Connecticut Medical School. Treated a bunch of water that was fed to mice I never met. Those mice just getting the water were cured. Interesting, storable. So I got storable system 1, I got storable system 2. That doesn't mean it's scalable. A recording would be scalable, but so far, we haven't done the right recording in the right way if it's at all possible. So it seems to have lost something in the recording process. Worth looking into, worth expanding, but right now it's not. So you can have storable but not scalable. You can have scalable but not storable. The question is, how do you put the two together?
And you apparently have done that with water. And
I've done that with water. And I did that with water. It was the same question. Well, now what do I do now that I have charged water? Well, looking around and poking around and just kind of what's going on out there that I don't know about, and I knew almost nothing about homeopathy, but I got turned on to it by, doesn't matter, the sequence, a curious sequence of events, and started talking to some homeopaths in the States as well as over the pond. And they start telling me about this, that, and the other characteristics of homeopathy. And I'm scratching my head going, what? What are they talking about? And so dilution and succussion. I said, well, what kind of dilution and succussion could you have if you diluted and succussed water? And how would you dilute and succuss cotton? So in the case of water, they go, oh, you can dilute and succuss water. And I go, nah. I mean, your head is going to explode because I'm taking water and I'm diluting it with water. And then pounding it, the succussion process, and then doing it again and doing it again and doing it again. So we started doing some of this stuff. And just first we started as pilot studies. And essentially we took about this much water. And I gave it to someone who knows cycling. That'd be me. And so I walked around on my deck, which is, you can't see. I walked around on my deck, cycling and holding a glass of water going, the hell am I doing this for? I mean, why am I, how did my life end up like this? I mean, what's wrong with this picture? And then we had it. So we had a treated water, which we already know from past experience, multiple experiments, will fix mice. But the homeopaths suggest we can increase its strength and we can scale it through this dilution and succussion method. So they actually have, some places have labs, mechanical arms, which will, they're putting this into it and then it comes out and then you put another thing in it's, again, I'm not a homeopath, but that's the plot, dilution and succussion.
Yeah, and just a note, I mean, I have a homeopathic vet, Dr.
Yeah.
Carol Tillman in Vegas, and she would give our pet medicine. She's like, you need to shake it 20 times. I'm like, okay, I'll do it, but I think it's ridiculous.
Well, I'm working with some vets too, and instead we're giving blinded, we got treated and untreated, and they're giving to their animals, they're putting a couple of drops of this stuff into their water bowls. So you got now 2 water bowls, you got a coin flip, and the cats go, and they go, no, I want this water. If you take away this water, they won't go to the other water. They look at you like, excuse me, did you get the wrong water? I'm not taking the cheesy stuff anymore. So we're doing that just anecdotal wise. And I did this instead of cats because I'm not a big cat fan. Instead of cats, we did it on people. Actually, I'm not a big people fan either. But we did this. We did 3 clinical. They're not experiments. We did 3 clinical efforts. Took about 100 people in the States, took 100 people in Europe, came back to the States, tried another 100 people. So we got roughly 100 people. And what they got was water that we had diluted and succussed. And we didn't come up with the magic number of dilution or succussion. I went to a sensitive, because the permutations are endless. And he said, do it a bunch of times. And so we pounded this and we poured that and we diluted this, we poured that, we did this and that. And then we recruited the 300 people in 3 different clinical tests, using tests loosely. Did anything happen? And all I had to do was come in with, conditions. They had psychological problems, they had physical problems, they had mental problems. Some said they had spiritual problems. I don't know, they had problems. So we didn't have a sample of anything that we could generalize. We just had a bunch of people with problems. Now, one of the problems with getting a bunch of people with problems is you also have a phenomenon known as regression to the mean. So if you take an extreme, you're gonna get changes. Nonetheless, short version, in our 3 clinical trials, using trial loosely, in our 3 clinical trials, 98% of the people reported significant changes. And they took this water, sublingual drops, 2 drops under the tongue 4 times a day, and they guaranteed that they would do it for 8 weeks, and we would get evaluations every 2 weeks. The data are unbelievable. I mean, they're literally unbelievable. And so we did, numerical stuff with it here, there, and the other, and they're extremely strong stuff that occurred. But the interesting part, the part that got my attention, is that some of the stuff that happened, at least by self-report, seemed to be stronger than the stuff we've heard from live. So I'll give you an anecdote, and this is nothing more than an anecdote. One guy who was in a wheelchair from Parkinson's for 5 years, hadn't been out of the wheelchair essentially in 5 years, sublingual drops. I think it was by the 6th week, he had thrown out his wheelchair, threw out the walkers, and he was walking a mile at a time. Now that's interesting. And the reason it's interesting to someone like me is that we've tried treating Parkinson's patients, live with the hands-on, and we don't make a dent. I mean, maybe a dent, but the dent's not a particularly big dent. It's nothing that you'd start flopping on the floor and getting impressed with. It's a little bit of improvement, symptomatic for a short period of time. This guy threw out his wheelchairs. Now, we talk about divergent responses. We've also had Parkinson's people not throw out their wheelchairs. So there's variation in response. It's not a miracle, but some of the miracles we're looking at seem to be stronger than what the original was. So I just finished a number of studies that really were experiments, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the details because they're not published yet, but under controlled conditions, double-blind conditions, can we take some of this water, give it to people who are seriously ill? Some will get the water, some will get control water. Will we see a difference? And the answer, like Dean and the blessings of the whatever, yes. Something real is going on. And it seems to be using a system that we can scale the water. So maybe, perhaps, fingers crossed, water will be better than a recording. Frankly, fingers crossed would say the recording should be better than the water because we can immediately scale that. But we figured out a system to scale this stuff, water anyway, and do the experiment with the scaled water to a few hundred people. And the number we've had is we're close to 500 people under controlled conditions now. There's even a skeptic like me says, whoa, something's going on here. This is worth going down a rabbit hole for.
Any thoughts on that thing, Dean?
Yeah, I have some of that magic water. I don't, fortunately, haven't had a need to use it, but I have it. Given that I've done experiments involving water and we see changes in plant growth and cell growth and human mood and things of that sort, I can accept what Bill is saying. I do think that underneath it, there's something about with the water in particular, the ritual of the succussion, the dilution, all of that. That is injecting meaning into the process itself, which might be important for this kind of phenomenon.
Yeah. And I don't know. So again, I'm walking around, charging a glass of water on the deck, and after that, I'm out in the backyard pounding, on a wooden table, this thing that trying to succuss it, and then I give it to Margaret, who tries to then dilute it, and then I go out there and pound it, and yeah. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know why I'm doing it. I'm following a method, and I'm making it my own, but I'm following a method that I do not comprehend, and I have to go out and test it, and I've done something's going on there.
Yeah. If that's really happening. Go ahead.
And the ritual part of it, I think, is important as well. Even without understanding the ritual too much, you're doing an action. The action is a way of focusing attention on what you're doing.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Here's a good question, kind of related to that. Do either one of you think blessed water by spiritual leaders, like in the Catholic religion, holy water works the same way?
Well, the same way it's hard to say because
intention.
Yeah, I guess. Right. I mean, it's hard to answer those kinds of questions because we don't know what we're doing in the first place. So right. We say, is this strange thing similar to that strange thing? Well, there's some resemblance, but we don't know.
Somebody at some point must have thought water was meaningful.
Yeah. Well, we are not only about 70% actual water as adults, but like 98% hydrogen-oxygen bonds within the body. So we're water beings, essentially. We're fish who've somehow figured out a way of carrying our water around with us. So maintain hydration. Must drink a lot of water.
Bill, how excited are you about the possibilities of this water, this latest research?
I'm stunned. I'm stunned. And what I want to do is obviously more replications. I want other people independently replicating what I've done. And I want to try it on different conditions. So the initial 300-person series of clinical trials was not targeted towards a particular condition. It was just some of the people had depression, some were bipolar, some had cancer, some had, whatever. And we were just taking anybody who needed help. What I'm looking for now is a series of targeted conditions. So for example, if we have depression, is it better on depression versus, we got the anecdote now that it seems to be very good on depression. It seems to be very good on bipolar. It seems to be very good on cancerous tumors. It seems to be very good on, can we take this out and do like an entire trial on cancer? I'd like to get some targeted stuff.
Yeah.
But frankly, you're thinking like, I found this. The only thing that happens to me when I finish a study is, oh my God, I just have to do at least 20 more, because the implications of this are pretty astounding. And the earlier stuff, that you could ask Dean, do you believe in the double slit? No, you don't believe in the double slit. It double slits. Do you believe in healing? No, I don't believe in healing. You'd have to be crazy to believe in healing. It just doesn't stop.
Yeah. The other thing that Bill has encountered this, and I as well, that you do a study, comes out fabulously well, and then they immediately start thinking, well, first of all, even my colleagues are not going to believe this, so maybe I won't publish it, or if I do, I have to, how do I vet it in such a way to convince myself as close to absolute as I can that it wasn't a mistake? And then how do I describe it to colleagues? And then how do I get them to try to replicate it?
Yep.
Well, all of those, if you do a study and nothing comes out at all, not only is that kind of a relief, but you can then publish that in a very high tier journal, because it will confirm what people already believe.
Because it's all crazy.
Yeah. If you get the other result and you're saying, holy smoke, what is this?
Yeah.
Very difficult to get anybody to pay attention or even to publish it.
Yep.
It's exciting because we're heading in a direction which I didn't really think I'd see in my lifetime, which I really am amazed about. And I want to ask both of you, if you've had behind the scenes, how are your colleagues and how are people in the scientific world changing, opening minds? First, Dean, because I know you have your heart out.
Well, I have a 2:00 heart out here. I would say that we, if you step back and look historically at where we are, there's a massive change going on within the scientific world, in that 30 years ago, if you told somebody that you're a scientist and you're studying consciousness, they would look at you strangely and walk away. Today, you can say that and people say, oh, how are you studying it? What are you doing? Did you go to this conference or that conference? So that's really a massive change that has happened in about 3 decades. So roughly like one and a half generations of students. That's a very fast change. That is not showing any sign of slowing down. That means that if we project forward another couple of decades, we're likely to find out much more about consciousness in general. Whether we find out about the kinds of aspects of consciousness that we're talking about here, that's a little less certain. But I know, because I'm contacted all the time by students and younger scientists who would just desperately want to study this stuff, that when opportunities begin to arise, meaning funding primarily, that there'll be plenty of people to step in and do that, because what could be more fascinating?
And I'm going to let you go, Dean, because I know if Bill starts answering, I don't want to let you go in the middle of the question. I thank you so much for being here, and I'll definitely want to have you back sometime in the future. I appreciate all the work you've done. Conscious Universe was the first book I read by you, and it's just opened my eyes. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hi, Bill. Hi,
Hey,
Bill.
I just want to go over real quick, just a couple of things. So talk about the doctors who stole the bottles of water, treated water.
Oh, well, I was doing an experiment recently, and we were in a COVID hospital. I wasn't there because I'm blinded to this and that. and but it was double-blind study, and so the people administering water, whether it was the treated water, the untreated water, they didn't know. Patients didn't know. Nobody knew. Everything was seriously blinded. But the doctors started in the hospital said, it seems like the people who take this water are getting better. And they scooped up some water and took it for their private patients at home, which is an interesting anecdote. Still only an anecdote, but it's interesting.
What do you think? And I know you spoke about this with Jeffrey Mishlove. What do you think will happen if you get your paper published and you start giving this water away? Where's Bill going to be right after that happens?
Well, what I want to do, frankly, is start looking at different conditions and what we can affect. Because I'm still thinking lab stuff. It'd be nice to get the water out there, and the water is going out there now. So we're figuring out a way to mass produce the stuff, and there's a group in the Netherlands trying to figure out how to bring this stuff to market. My big thing about it is that it needs to be cheap so that it's widely available and nobody gets excluded, who needs help. My draw will always be going back to the lab. Other people are going to take it and turn it into a business, and I'm not putting that down. It's just not my thing.
Are you worried about the CDC or the FDA reaction if you start selling, or just it becomes popular that Dr. Bill Bengston is giving away or selling treated water that can heal COVID or cancer?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I can show data. I'm not asking anyone to believe, but I can show data. And this goes to the question of who wants what. This will be driven by, an FDA, you just got to be careful what you say or you don't say. I know little about the FDA, but I do know that it can be somewhat restrictive and you have to be careful. And if I say I'm just giving away water, why can you get upset? Well, it turns out the FDA regulates water. So I don't know. I don't think in those terms. It's one of my limitations. I just don't think in those terms. I think in terms of what's the next study we need to do.
I'm sorry, my dog is going crazy. Same. Hold on 1 second. Stop. I think you need some treated water. So, are you seeing the same thing with Dean? Other colleagues that are more open to this? Last question.
Well, there's people who are fascinated by it. It's hard not to get drawn into it. It's pretty interesting, but it's very difficult to try to replicate. As I said, this stuff is not easy to do. It's not cheap to do. It's annoying to do. You need a lot of stuff going on to get it done. And I'm trying to make it so that it's simpler. So the methods are out there. If anybody listening to this wants to try to replicate this, I don't keep a secret what I'm doing. I teach it in workshops. I got a CD set that people can allegedly listen to it and then just do it for themselves. It's not a hidden secret that I have. It's the experimental stuff that's hard to do because it's hard to get the resources to be able to do what I've been able to do. So I've been fortunate in getting the backing, the funding, the labs, and like I showed before, I've been around a lot of places, and I'm getting pretty networked in, and people are fascinated by it. But you also have the social thing. You're not allowed to say it out loud.
One question about your water healing. Does it matter if the healers if they have intention to heal cancer, to heal?
No.
Doesn't matter, right? It's just healing. Take this. There's a good chance you might get better from this water.
It's not even an intention of healing. I hold the water and I cycle. That's all I do. I don't have an intention of this or that. I'm not forcing my my psyche on the world, and nothing like that's going on. It's much, much, much simpler than that, and much more elemental. Actually, one of the things I'd like to do soon is an experiment on whether or not directed intention will produce something different than non-directed intention. So, for example, if I treat a piece of cotton and I treat a piece of cotton just to treat a piece of cotton and it acts as a healing surrogate, will that be different than if I treat a piece of cotton for a particular condition and I know the condition? My suspicion, and it's not to be trusted, but my suspicion is that directed intention won't add anything to it, because I don't think healing has much to do with your conscious mind.
Well, if I believe if this is really as successful as you're talking about, it should, Bill, it should change the world. It should open people's minds. I don't know if you agree with this, but basically I say a lot. The world is so much different than what we've been taught growing up.
Oh, yeah. But I'm going to take it to the next step. The world is so much different than I see it too. And I don't have the conceptual tools to make sense of my own data. The good news is when people like Dean and me do experiments, we don't have to understand it to do the experiments. And if I look at all the stuff, like I gave you the list of, things we think we know and things we think we don't know, or things we don't know, the things we don't know far outstep the things that we know. And the things that we know are probably going to need to be modified in the course of time anyway.
Final question. You still excited do you still get excited doing this? For me, the more I learn, the more I don't want to sleep, because there's just so much new information, especially your new water experiment. I cannot wait to share that with people.
Yeah, it's reasonably interesting. It just went out to a journal a couple of days ago. And a couple of days before that, I had another recording piece go out to a journal that's already accepted by a biology journal. That's the work I did in Tokyo. The water stuff I'm pretty excited about. It's confounding because it doesn't make any sense. I don't have the conceptual tools to wrap my head around why it works. But at this point, no matter how skeptical I may be, something works. Something works. Yeah. And it seems to have captured something more than the recording. It's just slightly more difficult to scale.
It's exciting. And I appreciate you doing this. I'm so happy I got to do it. I'm so happy I was introduced to your work, and hopefully we'll do this again. And next time I'm in New York, I will stop by and we will hang out together.
That'd be fun.
All right, Bill, thanks.
Thank you.
Tell Margaret thank you.
Will do. See ya.
That went well. I was worried I wouldn't get all my questions in, but I think I did. I mean, I have a lot of stuff I didn't get to, but that's fine. I wrote too much stuff down. You guys, hopefully you will spread it around, because the water experiments are amazing. And like I said, I did not believe I didn't believe in homeopathy, but I took my dog to the vet and he had 2 ligaments that were torn separately, and the surgery was $3,000 per leg. That was the mainstream diagnosis. And we went to a homeopathic vet. She said, try this. It wasn't working. And then I waited and waited. And finally, he healed separately. Both of his tendons or ligaments in his knee healed. And I can't prove it was the homeopathy and medicine and supplements she gave us, but both of his knees healed. $6,000 not spent on surgery. He didn't have to go through that hell. And there were signs that the medicine, and I'll just show you the medicine. There were signs that the medicine did work, because she gave us, I think it was sulfur. I'm not sure what it was, but she gave it to us, and his knee was bad, but it wasn't that bad. And then we gave it to him. We gave the medicine to Cookie, and this is it. Basically, it's that type of medicine. You shake it 20 times, which I thought was nonsense. But now, after hearing Bill talking about him doing it too, there's something there. And so we gave him this medicine. The next day, his knee got so much worse for just no reason. So you read up, and sometimes the knee or the ailment will get worse right off the bat. There's no way, and if that's really what happened, and it wasn't something else, because I didn't see him hurt his knee. So only thing that was different, gave him the medicine, his knee got worse. You could say, well, Cookie obviously didn't know he was getting medicine. So what happened? And then he progressively got better. And then he hasn't had any problems with his knees since. So I would recommend a homeopathic doctor any day of the week. And one thing I'll ask Bill, She wanted to know what the not the dose, but I forget what homeopathy they use. Something. I'll send it to you, Bill, on her email. She had a question. So, any more questions? Let's see. Yeah, that was a really good interview. I wish we had a better live audience, but it's early in the day, and I'll make sure I promote the heck out of it on Twitter. And people will watch because it's so important. And I have a cousin who has a dog who's sick with cancer, and I told her to watch. Hopefully she will. Dean and Edgar Mitchell were the reason I participated with Free as an experiencer back in the day. Yeah, that survey is important. Although I still think, well, you guys know how I need to do a show about my more up-to-date thoughts on UFOs, which have changed not dramatically. Certain things have changed. I'd love to hear more about the UFO aspects from Dean sometime. I don't know if Dean talks about UFOs too much. I don't think he does. That was superb. You did so well, Joe. Thank you for this live. A brand new subject to me, and thanks to you. Yeah, it was new to me a couple of years ago. Thanks to Grace, who introduced me to this work. All right, guys, I'm going to go. Got a lot of stuff to do. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the questions. Sorry I didn't get to all of them. Oh, there's one question. Somebody asked to replicate this in another lab. Yeah, that's great. But the problem is, somebody said you have 2 independent labs do the same experiment. Yeah, that'd be great. But the problem is, as Bill said, some of these experiments, they cost $150,000 to $200,000. So even more. So you have to find labs that are interested and somebody who's willing to get that money or raise that money. Not so easy. So yeah, that's the goal. Hopefully there will be other people interested in this. All right, guys, I'm going to go. Have a good day. Thanks again.